Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Buckeye Politics. I got a great video for you today. So we're going to be looking at the Chicago mayoral election and the Wisconsin Supreme Court election, both of which will take place on Tuesday, April 4th of 2023. We're going to look at the city of Chicago first. This is the mayoral election. Chicago, a once great American city that has kind of fallen apart under Lori Lightfoot's leadership and now has a chance to change course. We had the runoff back in February where the Cook County Commissioner, for those of you who do not know, Cook County is the county that Chicago is in. If you look at like the lines, it's basically just the city of Chicago, but there are a few other cities in there. So yeah, he is the Cook County Commissioner since 2018. And we also have Paul Vallas, who is the more moderate candidate. He was the executive officer of Chicago Public Schools. He ran for lieutenant governor of Illinois in 2014, and he's running as the more moderate Democrat, the pro-police, anti-inflation kind of guy, while Brandon Johnson is the more progressive-style Democrat, who is better than Lori Lightfoot. I'll give him credit where credit is due. But still, Paul Vallas is clearly the much better choice for the city of Chicago. And looking at the race here, Paul Vallas won the primary relatively handily, actually. So if we can go up and find it somewhere. Where are the primary results? Here they are. They're at the top. So Paul Vallas got 185,000 votes and 32.9% of the popular vote. Brandon Johnson got 21.63% of the vote. So Paul Vallas beat Brandon Johnson relatively handily. But when you have elections like these, you got to look at the candidates who did not qualify and kind of see where those voters may go. Because you have someone like Willie Wilson here who ran as a more right-wing, I don't want to say right-wing because he really wasn't, but as a more moderate anti-crime platform. So those 9% of voters who voted for Willie Wilson are probably going to vote for Paul Vallas. I don't know why they would vote for Brandon Johnson if their biggest issue is crime and inflation and they're more moderate. Troy Garcia, he is a progressive congressman or a former congressman. He left a perfectly safe seat to run for mayor, got 13% of the vote. That's a huge L, but he got 13% of the vote. He is more progressive, but he also talked about crime. So I'd say his voters would probably go to Brandon Johnson, but there'd probably be some who do vote for Paul Vallas. Lori Lightfoot got 16%, but if you're delusional enough to vote for Lori Lightfoot, you're probably a progressive, so those voters are probably going to go to Brandon Johnson, just being honest here. So if you add up those totals together, Lori Lightfoot's voters, 16%, probably going to break for Brandon Johnson. Willie Wilson's voters, 9%, probably going to break for Paul Vallas. Troy Garcia voters, probably going to break for Brandon Johnson narrowly, but there might be some who vote for Vallas. So you can do the math. It's clear that's going to be a pretty close race. And that's what we've seen based on the polls. Let's go down here and look at the polling for the race. Paul Vallas maintains a very slim lead. His average is about 46% or so. There was a recent poll from Emerson, which is usually very accurate. They weren't really in 2022. They were better than most, but they still weren't perfect. I used to think Emerson was like a great poll that I would always use. That's kind of what I base my predictions off of. They proved me wrong in 2022, so I guess I'd say take this with a grain of salt. But Emerson is a traditionally very accurate pollster. They have Paul Vallas up by about 6 points. Victory Research, another decent pollster, they have Paul Vallas up by just 2. IZQ Strategies, no idea who these guys are. They have Brandon Johnson up by 2. And then there was a recent poll in middle of March by BSP Research, and that was actually funded. Well, it wasn't funded directly by Brandon Johnson, but it was funded by the Study of Diversity and Democracy, the Illinois Black Advocacy Initiative, and the Latino Victory Project. Pretty clear who they're going to support in that race, and they have the race at its high. They do have a very large sample size, though, so that's interesting to look at. So clearly the polls have gone back and forth between Paul Vallas and Brandon Johnson, although I will say there is a couple polls here who the polls overestimated or underestimated Paul Vallas in the primary. A lot of people thought the race would be pretty close. Paul Vallas ended up winning by over 11. So the polls do show a pretty tight race here, but they did underestimate Paul Vallas in the first election, the primary, I guess you would say. So I am pretty hopeful that Paul Vallas will win here. I don't think he's going to win by a landslide, but it's Chicago. We shouldn't expect that. But I do think he's probably a narrow favorite over Brandon Johnson. When we look at the endorsements, Brandon Johnson's got the endorsements of people like Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Jesse Jackson, a lot of people who, the more progressive side of things. Well, Paul Vallas is endorsed by Dick Durbin, a lot of labor unions, and some Catholic organizations. Very interesting. A lot more, I guess you would say, center of the aisle people in terms of on the Democratic Party side. So it's going to be a close race, but I do think Paul Vallas is probably narrowly favored. Now we're going to talk about the big election, and that is the Supreme Court election in Wisconsin. And a lot of you are probably thinking, why are we talking about a Supreme Court election? Why are we hyping this up? I'll tell you why. Wisconsin is a very critical swing state. It's in the Midwest, obviously. It voted Democrat for over 20 years, the 1990s, 2000s. Donald Trump managed to flip it narrowly in 2016, and it helped propel him to the White House. He then lost it very narrowly in 2020. And the Democrats very narrowly hung on to the governorship in 2022, but Ron Johnson managed to very narrowly hang on to the Senate seat in 2022. This is a state that has gone back and forth and will probably be one of, if not the closest state in 2024. Now, the Supreme Court, which decides how redistricting goes, abortion rights, voting rights, if Trump were to sue like he did in 2020, all that good stuff, it is controlled 4-3 by conservatives. It's officially nonpartisan, but people who say they're conservative, there are 4 seats, and people who are liberal hold 3 seats. So one of the conservatives is retiring, so that leaves it 3-3. If the liberal candidates were to win, that would put them in a 4-3 majority, and that could have big effects in 2024. Because let's say that redistricting, Wisconsin, in terms of drawing the congressional maps, if Democrats take control, they could have a bigger say in how the maps go. Republicans could lose a couple of seats. When it comes to voting rights, they could just destroy the voting measures we put in place, and next thing you know, you have mail-in ballots coming from all over the state that can't be verified, all that good stuff. Almost what's happening in places like California and New York. And so it's a pretty big issue. And the Republicans, or I shouldn't say the Republicans, the conservatives nominated Daniel Kelly, who is a former Supreme Court justice. He won the primary by just a couple of points over Jennifer Dorow, who is also a conservative candidate. You look at the results here, you see Janet Protasiewicz, don't know how to pronounce it, at about 46%, and you think, oh, wow, we're screwed. But then you look at Daniel Kelly and Jennifer Dorow, both conservatives, but the vote, 24-21, it actually shows a pretty competitive race. Everett Mitchell is more progressive, so that vote's probably going to break for Janet Protasiewicz. But it's also going to be a much more higher turnout election. We have seen millions of dollars spent on this race from out of state, both Republicans and Democrats, piling millions of dollars into this race. Scott Pretzler, who is a grassroots kind of guy for the GOP, has been blitzing the state. Republicans are energized. I mean, this is a race that although it doesn't look very good for them, Republicans know they got to win this seat if they want to hold back the progressive agenda in the state of Wisconsin. And so although it does look like Janet Protasiewicz has a pretty solid lead, I mean, she's gotten a lot of money, Daniel Kelly's not out of this. He's been campaigning hard. He's running a lot of good ads. And this is one of the first elections where it's actually relatively even in terms of fundraising. Normally, Democrats easily outspend and outraise Republicans. But Republicans, grassroots, they understand how important this race is. And Daniel Kelly has managed to get a decent amount of money, and he's also campaigned a lot. So this is certainly going to be a close race. Gun to my head, I do think Janet Protasiewicz probably pulls it off by like a point or so, which is obviously a horrible thing. So if you live in Wisconsin, you've got to get out there and vote for Daniel Kelly. He's going to keep Wisconsin, its conservative majority intact, and he's going to hold back the Democrats. And it's going to be very important that you vote in this election. So get out there and vote for Daniel Kelly. As I said, we will be streaming this result as well as the Chicago mayor election on Tuesday. Be sure to tune in. Thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, like and subscribe for more.